Part 1. Setting the Stage in Darujhistan. Toll the Hounds by Steven Erikson returns the reader to the storied city of Darujhistan, a place that has long stood at the crossroads of empires, gods, and mortal ambition. Unlike earlier entries in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, this novel adopts a more reflective, almost elegiac tone, focusing heavily on themes of grief, inevitability, and convergence. The narrative voice itself, revealed to be that of Krupa, adds a layer of theatrical introspection, guiding the reader through events that feel both intimate and world-shaking. Darujhistan is no longer simply a vibrant city of intrigue. It has become a gathering point for forces both mortal and divine. Beneath its familiar streets and lively markets, tensions quietly build. The city's rulers, its thieves' guilds, and its ordinary citizens sense that something vast is approaching, though few understand its nature. The presence of Anamander Rake, son of darkness and lord of moons, Spawn, looms large over the narrative. Rake's return to Darujhistan signals not just a political or military shift, but something far more profound, an impending reckoning tied to his ancient past and the fate of his people, the Tiste Andi. Rake himself is portrayed with a deep sense of weariness. His immortality has become a burden, and his long stewardship of the Andi has left him questioning the purpose of their continued existence. The Andi, once a proud and vibrant race, are now steeped in melancholy and existential despair. Their immortality has stripped life of urgency, leaving them detached and hollow. Rake's internal struggle centers on whether he can finally grant his people release from this endless stagnation. Meanwhile, the narrative introduces several other key figures whose paths will inevitably intersect. Among them is Nimander Golit, a young Tiste Andi who struggles under the weight of leadership after the death of his father. Nimander and his companions and his wander toward Darujhistan, guided by forces they barely comprehend. Their journey is both physical and spiritual, reflecting the broader themes of identity and purpose that permeate the novel. In parallel, the story follows Karsa Orlong, the formidable Teblur warrior. Once a figure of unstoppable violence, Karsa is now undergoing a subtle but significant transformation. His journey toward Darujhistan is driven by a growing awareness of the consequences of his actions and a desire to redefine his place in the world. Though still immensely dangerous, Karsa's introspection adds complexity to his character, suggesting that even the most brutal individuals are capable of change. Back in Darujhistan, familiar faces from earlier in the series reappear. Characters like Cutter, formerly Crocus Younghand, and Chalice Darl navigate their own personal struggles, entangled in love, betrayal, and ambition. Cutter's return to the city marks a turning point for him as he confronts the lingering shadows of his past and the choices that have shaped him. Chalice, meanwhile, finds herself trapped in a life of privilege that offers little happiness, highlighting the novel's recurring theme of disillusionment. The city's underworld also plays a crucial role. The assassin guilds, thieves, and shadowy operators who once thrived in relative balance now face disruption as new powers emerge. The delicate equilibrium that has long defined Darujhistan begins to unravel, setting the stage for conflict. Above all, there is a pervasive sense of convergence. Characters from disparate parts of the world are drawn toward Darujhistan as if by an unseen hand. This gathering is not coincidental. It is the result of forces set in motion long ago. The gods themselves are restless, their influence subtly shaping events. Hud, the god of death, becomes an especially significant presence. hinting at a profound shift in the nature of mortality and the afterlife. As Part 1 closes, the reader is left with a growing sense of anticipation. The stage is set, the players are in motion, and the city of Darujhistan stands at the brink of transformation. The novel's deliberate pacing allows for deep character exploration, but beneath this measured surface lies the promise of upheaval, a convergence that will test the limits of gods and mortals alike. Part 2: Gathering Shadows and Fractured Lives. As Toll the Hounds continues, the sense of convergence intensifies, and the narrative deepens its focus on the inner lives of its characters. The pacing remains deliberate, but tension steadily mounts as multiple storylines begin to tighten around Darujhistan. The city itself feels increasingly like a crucible, drawing in broken souls, ancient powers, and unresolved histories. One of the central threads follows Cutter, whose return to Darujhistan forces him to confront the emotional wreckage of his past. No longer the naive thief once known as Crocus Younghand, Cutter is hardened, conflicted, and burdened by guilt. His relationship with Chalice Darl becomes a focal point, illustrating the tragic gap between desire and reality. Chalice, trapped in a loveless marriage and suffocated by expectations of nobility, seeks escape in Cutter, but their connection is strained by time, change, and mutual disillusionment. Their interactions are marked by longing and frustration, emphasizing how people who once shared something genuine can grow irrevocably apart. Parallel to this is the quiet unraveling of Chalice herself. Her life of privilege has become a prison, and her attempts to assert control over her fate only deepen her despair. Erikson paints her not simply as a tragic figure, but as someone caught in the consequences of choices, both her own and those imposed upon her by society. Her storyline underscores one of the novel's key ideas, that suffering is often mundane, rooted not in grand battles but in the slow erosion of hope. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the city, the assassin guilds and criminal networks face disruption. Old hierarchies begin to fracture as new players emerge and hidden agendas surface. The careful balance that once defined Darujhistan's underworld starts to collapse, mirroring the broader instability affecting the world. Murders and quiet betrayals ripple through the city, creating an atmosphere of unease that contrasts with the outward normalcy of daily life. Beyond the city, Nimander Golit and his companions continue their journey, grappling with their identity as Tiste Undi. Nimander's struggle with leadership becomes more pronounced, as he doubts his ability to guide his group or live up to the legacy of his father. His companions, each carrying their own burdens, reflect different facets of Andai despair. Their immortality has not granted wisdom or peace. Instead, it has magnified their sense of futility. Yet there are moments, fleeting but significant, where they glimpse the possibility of meaning, suggesting that even among the Andai, change may be possible. Karsa Orlong's storyline continues to evolve in subtle ways. Though still a figure of immense physical power, Karsa's internal journey becomes increasingly important. His encounters along the road force him to reconsider his understanding of strength, honor, and freedom. Where once he saw the world in simple terms of dominance and submission, he now begins to perceive complexity. This shift does not soften him, but it adds layers to his character, making his eventual role in the unfolding events all the more significant. At the same time, the novel introduces and develops the perspective of the Hounds of Shadow and the looming presence of the Hounds of Darkness. These supernatural creatures, tied to ancient powers, serve as both symbols and agents of the coming convergence. Their movements are deliberate, their purpose unclear but undeniably ominous. The title of the novel begins to take on greater resonance, hinting at a moment when these forces will be unleashed. Hovering over all of this is the growing influence of Hood. His presence is felt more strongly, though often indirectly, as whispers of death and transformation circulate. Hood's role is not merely that of a passive god overseeing the dead. He is actively preparing for something unprecedented. Boundaries between life and death begin to feel less certain, and the idea of mortality itself is subtly called into question. In Darujhistan, Anamander Rake remains a distant yet central figure. His actions are measured, his intentions obscured, but it is clear that he is moving toward a decisive act. Those around him sense the gravity of what is to come, even if they cannot fully grasp it. Rake's interactions with others are tinged with finality, as though he is quietly putting his affairs in order. The narrative also lingers on the ordinary citizens of Darujhistan, grounding the epic scope of the story in human experience. Through their eyes, the reader sees the subtle shifts in the city, the unease, the rumors, the sense that something is wrong. These perspectives reinforce the idea that world-changing events are not just the domain of heroes and gods, but also profoundly affect those who have no power to influence them. By the end of Part 2, the various threads have grown tighter, and the sense of impending collision becomes unmistakable. Characters are moving into position, knowingly or not, and the forces gathering around Darujhistan are nearing a breaking point. The tone remains introspective, but beneath it lies a mounting pressure, as if the world itself is holding its breath in anticipation of what is to come. Part 3. Convergence and the Weight of Fate. In the middle movements of Toll the Hounds, the slow-burning tensions begin to crystallize into undeniable momentum. The narrative, still guided by the reflective and often philosophical voice of Krupa, takes on a heavier emotional weight as the characters draw closer, both physically and spiritually, to their points of convergence. Darujhistan is no longer merely a setting. It becomes the axis upon which destinies turn. Cutter's storyline reaches a critical emotional juncture. His attempts to reconnect with Chalice Darl collapse under the strain of reality. What once felt like possibility now reveals itself as illusion. Chalice, trapped in her circumstances and increasingly desperate, makes choices that carry irreversible consequences. Her arc becomes one of quiet tragedy, shaped not by grand external forces, but by internal despair and misjudgment. Cutter, in turn, is forced to confront the painful truth that he cannot save her, or perhaps that he never truly understood her. This realization marks a turning point in his character, pushing him further away from the boy he once was and into a harsher, more disillusioned adulthood. Within Darujhistan's underworld, instability erupts into open conflict. Assassins move against one another, alliances fracture, and the invisible lines of power that once maintained order dissolve. The city's hidden machinery begins to break down, creating opportunities for chaos. Murders are no longer isolated incidents, but part of a broader unraveling. The sense of inevitability grows stronger, as though the city itself is being prepared for a transformative event. At the same time, Nimander Golit and his companions finally approach Darujhistan, their journey marked by introspection and uncertainty. Nimander's struggle with leadership reaches its peak as he grapples with the expectations placed upon him and his own self-doubt. Yet there is a subtle shift within him, where once he hesitated, he begins to accept responsibility, not because he feels worthy, but because he understands that inaction carries its own cost. His group, still burdened by the ennui of the Tiste Andi, begins to show faint signs of change. suggesting that their long stagnation may not be entirely irreversible. Karsa Orlong's path continues to intersect with the broader narrative in unexpected ways. His encounters grow increasingly symbolic, reflecting his evolving worldview. Karsa begins to recognize the limitations of brute strength and the complexity of the world he once sought to dominate. Though he remains a figure of immense violence, his choices now carry a degree of deliberation that was previously absent. This evolution positions him as both a potential catalyst and an unpredictable variable in the events to come. The supernatural elements of the story become more pronounced. The Hounds of Shadow move with increasing purpose. Their presence felt like a gathering storm. At the same time, the Hounds of Darkness, far more ancient and terrifying, begin to stir. These creatures are not merely beasts. They are manifestations of primal forces tied to the very fabric of existence. Their impending arrival signals that the coming conflict will transcend mortal concerns, touching on the deepest layers of the Malazan world's metaphysics. Central to this growing convergence is Anamander Rake. His actions, though still enigmatic, take on a sense of finality. Rake is clearly moving toward a deliberate and monumental decision, one that carries immense personal and cosmic significance. His interactions with others are marked by a quiet gravity, as though he is preparing not just for battle, but for sacrifice. The burden he carries, both as a leader of the Tiste Andi and as an individual, is immense, and the narrative begins to hint that resolution will require more than mere strength. Equally significant is the increasing presence of Hood. No longer a distant and abstract deity, Hood becomes an active participant in the unfolding events. His motivations remain partially obscured, but it is clear that he is orchestrating something unprecedented. The boundaries between life and death grow thinner, and the concept of mortality itself becomes fluid. Hood's involvement suggests that the coming convergence will not only reshape the world of the living, but also the realm of the dead. Darujhistan's ordinary citizens continue to provide a grounding perspective. Their lives, touched by fear and uncertainty, reflect the broader impact of the gathering storm. Rumors spread, tensions rise, and a subtle but pervasive dread settles over the city. These glimpses of everyday life serve to heighten the stakes, reminding the reader that the consequences of what is to come will extend far beyond the central characters. As Part 3 concludes, the narrative reaches a point of near inevitability. The various threads, emotional, political, and supernatural, have drawn tightly together, leaving little room for divergence. The characters are in place, the forces are aligned, and the stage is set for a profound and possibly catastrophic convergence. The tone remains contemplative, but it is now underscored by a growing sense of urgency, as though time itself is running out. Part 4. Sacrifice, Rupture, and the Tolling of Fate. In this penultimate movement of Toll the Hounds, the long-foreshadowed convergence finally erupts into action. The reflective tone that has characterized much of the novel does not disappear, but it is now interwoven with moments of sudden violence, profound sacrifice, and irreversible transformation. The title itself, Toll the Hounds, finds its full meaning here, as ancient powers are unleashed, and the cost of their release is paid in blood and soul. Darujhistan becomes the epicenter of chaos. The fragile balance that once held the city together collapses completely as multiple forces collide. Assassins strike openly, long-hidden enemies reveal themselves, and the streets become battlegrounds. Yet the violence is not senseless. It feels like the inevitable release of tensions that have been building throughout the novel. Every action carries weight. every death significance. One of the most devastating threads reaches its conclusion in the tragic fate of Chalice Darl. Her downward spiral culminates in a moment of despair that underscores the novel's recurring theme of quiet, personal suffering. Her death is not heroic or grand, but it is deeply affecting, serving as a stark reminder that the emotional struggles of individuals can be as consequential as the clashes of gods. Cutter's reaction to her death is equally important. He is forced to confront not only his grief, but also his own limitations, his inability to change the past or save those he cares about. This moment marks a profound emotional turning point for him, solidifying his transformation into a more somber and self-aware figure. Amid the turmoil, the supernatural conflict intensifies dramatically. The Hounds of Shadow are unleashed, their presence a terrifying spectacle as they tear through the city. Soon after, the Hounds of Darkness emerge, older, more powerful, and far more destructive. Their clash is not merely a battle between creatures, but a manifestation of ancient rivalries and cosmic forces. The streets of Darujhistan become the stage for this otherworldly confrontation, blurring the line between mortal and divine realms. At the heart of everything stands Anomander Rake, whose long-prepared plan finally comes to fruition. In a moment that is both shocking and deeply symbolic, Rake allows himself to be killed by Dasam Ultor, the first sword, and a man driven by his own grief and rage. This act is not a defeat, but a deliberate sacrifice. Rake's death is the key to a larger purpose, one that transcends his own existence. Through this sacrifice, Rake enters Dragnapur, the cursed sword that has long been both his weapon and his burden. Within the sword lies a nightmarish realm where souls are chained to a wagon, eternally dragging a gate that holds back chaos. By choosing to die in this way, Rake seeks to break this cycle and free the souls trapped within. His actions represent not only a personal redemption, but also a profound act of compassion. He takes upon himself the suffering of countless others, embodying the novel's exploration of sacrifice as both a burden and a form of grace. Simultaneously, Hood makes his own unprecedented move. Manifesting in the mortal world, Hood willingly allows himself to be killed, an act that defies his very nature as the god of death. This shocking event destabilizes the boundaries between life and death, creating a moment of profound metaphysical upheaval. Hood's motivations, like Rake's, are rooted in a desire to change the existing order, to break cycles that have long seemed immutable. Inside Dragnapur, the convergence continues on a different plane. The realm within the sword becomes the setting for a final, desperate struggle against chaos. Here, Rake's presence galvanizes the trapped souls, offering them a chance at release. The imagery is stark and powerful: endless darkness, crushing weight, and the looming threat of annihilation. Yet within this despair, there is also hope, the possibility that sacrifice can lead to renewal. Back in Darujhistan, the physical and supernatural battles reach their peak. The city endures immense destruction, but it does not fall. Instead, it becomes a place of transformation, where the actions of individuals, both mortal and divine, reshape the fabric of reality. The convergence that has been building throughout the novel finds its release in these moments, fulfilling the promise of inevitability that has hung over the narrative from the beginning. Karsa or Long, present during these events, plays his own role in the unfolding chaos. Though not central to the metaphysical climax, his actions reflect his continued evolution. He witnesses the consequences of power and the weight of sacrifice, further shaping his understanding of the world and his place within it. As Part 4 draws to a close, the immediate violence begins to subside, but its consequences remain vast and unresolved. The deaths of figures like Rake and Hood send ripples through both the mortal and divine realms. The chains that once bound certain forces have been broken, but what will replace them is uncertain. The tolling of the hounds has come and gone, but its echo lingers, deep, resonant, and filled with both loss and possibility. Part 5. Aftermath, Renewal, and the Quiet Echo of Sacrifice. In the final movement of Toll the Hounds, the chaos of convergence gives way to a quieter, deeply reflective aftermath. The violence that tore through Darujhistan subsides, leaving behind a city and a world irrevocably changed. Yet rather than focusing on triumph or defeat, the narrative turns its attention to consequence, healing, and the fragile possibility of renewal. The most profound impact stems from the sacrifice of Anamander Rake. His death reverberates far beyond the physical world, fundamentally altering the fate of the Tiste Andia. For ages, they have lived under the shadow of despair, their immortality a source of stagnation rather than strength. Rake's final act, his entry into Dragnapur and the breaking of its terrible cycle, serves as a form of liberation. The Andiai are no longer bound in the same way to their endless melancholy. Though their future remains uncertain, there is now the possibility of change, of rediscovering purpose. Within the shattered remnants of Dragnapur's realm, the consequences of Rake's sacrifice continue to unfold. The chained souls, once condemned to eternal suffering, are granted release. The gate that held back chaos is no longer sustained through endless torment, suggesting a fundamental shift in the balance between order and oblivion. This transformation is not presented as a simple victory. It is complex, ambiguous, and laden with risk. Yet it represents a break from the past, an assertion that even the most entrenched systems can be undone through courage and compassion. The death of Hood also leaves a profound void. With the god of death removed from his position, the structure of the afterlife is thrown into uncertainty. Souls no longer follow the same paths, and the natural order appears destabilized. However, this upheaval carries within it the potential for renewal. Hood's willingness to sacrifice himself suggests that even divine roles are not immutable, and that change, however disruptive, may be necessary to break cycles of suffering. Back in Darujhistan, the survivors grapple with the aftermath in deeply personal ways. Cutter, shaped by loss and hard-earned understanding, begins to move forward with a quieter, more grounded sense of self. The pain of Chalice Darl's death remains with him, but it no longer defines him entirely. Instead, it becomes part of a broader acceptance of the world's complexities, its capacity for both beauty and tragedy. Other inhabitants of the city also begin to rebuild. The destruction caused by the clash of mortal and supernatural forces has left scars, both physical and emotional. Yet Darujhistan endures, as it always has. Its resilience becomes a subtle but powerful theme, emphasizing that even in the face of overwhelming upheaval, life continues. Nimander Golit's arc reaches a quiet resolution. Having endured doubt and uncertainty, he emerges with a clearer sense of identity and responsibility. His journey reflects the broader transformation of the Tiste Andi, suggesting that their future will be shaped not by the weight of their past, but by the choices they make moving forward. Nimander does not become a perfect leader, but he becomes a willing one, and that, in the context of the novel, is enough. Karsa Orlong departs from the convergence changed, though still unmistakably himself. His experiences in Darujhistan deepen his understanding of power, responsibility, and consequence. While he remains a figure of immense strength and potential violence, there is now a greater awareness guiding his actions. His journey continues beyond the scope of this novel, but the events here mark an important step in his evolution. The Hounds, whose unleashing gave the novel its title, recede once more into the shadows. Their role in the convergence underscores the interplay between primal forces and deliberate choice. They are not simply agents of destruction, but part of a larger, more intricate balance that governs the world. Throughout the conclusion, the narrative voice, still shaped by Krupa's unique perspective, emphasizes reflection over resolution. Questions remain unanswered, and not all threads are neatly tied. This is deliberate. The novel resists the idea of a clean ending, instead presenting a world that continues to evolve, shaped by the actions and sacrifices of those within it. Ultimately, Toll the Hounds is less about the events themselves than about their meaning. It is a meditation on grief, compassion, and the possibility of change. Through the sacrifices of figures like Rake and Hood, the story suggests that true transformation requires not just power, but a willingness to endure loss for the sake of others. As the dust settles and the echoes of conflict fade, what remains is a sense of quiet continuity. The world has changed, but it has not ended. Life persists, carrying forward the memory of what was lost and the hope, however fragile, of what might yet be gained.
Please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more videos.